Hey, what's going on, guys? Adam here with 80 Proof Goods. I wanted to take this opportunity to walk through how our acrylic notebook template works for all the DIY crafters who want to do this themselves at home. I started selling these acrylic templates of a couple of my products. I have 3 of them available right now. The notebook cover, which you see here, an AirTag keychain, and my really popular money envelope. So this video will kind of serve as more or less a walkthrough on how to actually use the template. So the first thing you want to do is select the leather or material that you want to work with. Doesn't necessarily have to be leather. And then you want to trace out the acrylic template on your material. The thing that you want to focus on here is my template has 2 supporting bars on the acrylic itself, which are kind of in that center cutout there that you want to avoid. They're just there for structural support on the acrylic because the acrylic can be a little bit flimsy, so I added these bars to make sure it doesn't crack on you. I want it to have a good customer experience. With that said, I'm going to focus on the interior panel of the notebook cover first. So I'm only tracing that out. I'm going to cut it, I'm going to finish it, and then I'm going to move on to the outer panel so that we can assemble. So here I'm actually using chisels to kind of stamp out the curvature on the inner piece of the inner panel. Obviously you can just use a knife. I have the chisels, so if you have chisels like that or tools that I'm using, it definitely makes life a little bit easier. So from here I'm using a knife to just carefully cut with my ruler the card slots. So I call these card slots, they're basically business card slots. You can put things like paper clips or pens in these slots once it's all together, which you'll see a little bit later on. And then I cut myself, which you probably just saw me kind of like freak out and glitch out a little bit there. As I was pulling the knife away, it slipped through my hands and nicked a piece of my finger. So be careful with your sharp tools. Here my ISO went out of whack, so it's a little bit brighter for the next couple of clips, but we do fix it a little bit later on. So we'll just move on from that. I'm going to bevel and burnish the inner piece of the inner panel. That's this inner flap. The left is going to serve as kind of a paper pocket, and the right is going to serve as where your notebook cover, or your notebook, I'm sorry, is going to tuck in. So I'm going to bevel and burnish those 2 pieces because once the notebook cover is all together, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to do that later on, so you want to do it now. Okay. Inner panel for the notebook cover is complete. Let's use the same acrylic template to trace out the outer panel. So basically what you're going to do is just trace it out again, avoiding the center section because the outer cover is just completely, solid piece. From there, I'm just going to cut away all of the excess material and then move on to our pen loop. Now, there are 2 pen loops that are going to lock the notebook cover shut once this thing is all together. So when you put a pen through these loops that are going to be stitched into the outer panel, it's actually going to lock the cover shut with the pen through those loops. So trace those guys out twice. You're going on 2 of them. And obviously this is an optional step. If you want to use the notebook cover without pen loops, you can omit those 2 pieces and just continue on as usual. It's going to cut down your crafting time, I wouldn't say significantly, but it's definitely going to cut it down. And then from there, I'm going to bevel, burnish, and finish up those pen loops. Now, I like to use Tokonole and canvas cloth for beveling, burnishing all of my leather goods. I think it's a really awesome way to finish the edges on leather, but there are so many different methods out there for you to choose from and do what's comfortable for you. Here I'm using 1/8 inch double-sided tape from Tandy. Now, this is a really, really useful trick for pieces that you don't really have to glue. Once this is stitched down, it's not going anywhere. So I like to use tape to stitch down, or to adhere my pen loops. And you'll see you're going to do one on the left a little bit higher than halfway, and the one on the right a little bit lower than halfway on the sides. So I think the notebook cover is 9 inches tall, so the left side is going to be just above the 4.5 inch mark, and the right side is going to be just below the 4.5 inch. So when you fold them together, they meet in the middle. Now that everything's together, I glued the inner panel to the outer panel. I'm going to use my chisels again to punch out the curvature on the edges on the 4 corners. I like curved edges just because when you go to bevel and burnish, it's going to kind of round out those edges anyway. So you want to get ahead of that curve and just punch out the harsh 90-degree angles. Here I'm using a sewing machine, light brown stitching on this Olmo Minerva leather. If you are using a sewing machine, actually, whether you're using a sewing machine or you're just doing it by hand, the little inner panel where it's really thin on the top and bottom, just be really careful with those pieces because if you're not experienced or if you're not paying attention, you have the tendency to stitch and kind of go off the edge. So you really want to be careful. Those are really thin pieces, but I really was proud of myself when designing this. I left a 1/4 inch at the top, 1/4 inch at the bottom, and my stitching line is 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. So the stitching should fall right in the middle of those 2 slivers. And there you have it. I like to break open the seams on the inside just to make sure there's no excess glue. Then you can stuff your notebook and lock it shut with that pen. Now, if you wanted to buy the finished product, it comes with the cover, the notebook, and the pen. But if you want to DIY, this is a perfect way to do it yourself.